Good afternoon, and welcome to the inaugural program for Sage Wednesdays. Sage Wednesdays is a series of midday programs sponsored by Cornell United Religious Work and the Department of Music that will alternate programs of words and music with organ recitals, programs that will be focused on issues of contemporary concern. Since 1875, Sage Chapel has been the place for the articulation of a public theology and a public philosophy. This semester, our general theme for the speaker-driven programs is Be the Change, a takeoff on Mahatma Gandhi's famous quote, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." Several of our speaker-driven programs, including this event today, will be co-sponsored with the Africana Studies and Research Center as part of a series called Race and the Presidency. But before I introduce our guest speaker, Dorian Bandy, class of 2009 in Arts and Sciences, the Department of Music, will be playing a Baroque viola prelude, 3 movements from Bach's first cello suite, the Allemande, Carante, and Sarabande. Thank you so much, Dorian. The focus of today's presentation will be on Lincoln, the Gettysburg Address, and race. In keeping with this year's first-year reading project at Cornell focused on Gary Will's book, Lincoln at Gettysburg. Our speaker of the hour in many ways challenges many of the prevalent theses operative that assert that Abraham Lincoln was the great emancipator. He is the author of the book Forced into Glory, Abraham Lincoln's White Dream. You would not believe it to look at him, but Lerone Bennett was born in 1928 in Clarksdale, Mississippi, home of the legendary and pioneering blues musician Muddy Waters. In 1949, he received a BA from Morehouse College, where his contemporary Martin Luther King Jr. graduated the year before. In 1953, he began his work at Ebony magazine, the organization with whom he worked for 5 decades, retiring as executive editor. Lerone Bennett has been a prolific writer over these 5 decades, authoring articles, poems, short stories, and 10 books on United States racial history and the political challenges facing African Americans. Among these books, in addition to the book on Lincoln, are Before the Mayflower, A History of Black America, 1619 to 1962, and other books such as What Man of Man, a biography of Martin Luther King Jr., Pioneers in Protest, The Shaping of Black America, and Wade in the Water, Great Moments in Black History. Recipient of numerous awards, Mr. Bennett won the Literature Award of the Academy of Arts and Letters in 1978 and the American Book Award's Lifetime Achievement Award in 2002. We are pleased to introduce to you this afternoon the prolific writer and historian, Lerone Bennett.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that introduction, and I want to compliment the musician. I worked my way through college as a musician. I was a jazz musician. I didn't sing the blues, but I played the blues. One of my favorite numbers is the Bach Cello Suite, and I'm so happy to hear it here. Would have also been happy to hear Muddy Waters, but we can't have everything we want at the same time. I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be in this setting. I love this setting. In my dreams, I've pictured myself in such a setting, and I'm delighted and I'm indebted to Dr. Clark for making this possible. Let me tell you first, and I will not do extemporaneous things often. Let me tell you how I got interested in Abraham Lincoln as a preliminary to what I'm going to say. I was born in Jackson, Mississippi. I was born in Mississippi. I was in Clarksdale first and then in Jackson. But I was born in Mississippi in the 1920s, which was the worst place in the world for a black boy. All black girl. Violence everywhere, intimidation everywhere, mystification everywhere. And I was a strange young man. I developed a passion, a love for reading. I was strange. In my ignorance, I thought if I learned how to read, I could change the state of Mississippi. But I read everything I could put my hands on. I patronized a used bookstore down the street. Every penny I had, I went to this salesman down the street, and we had a deal. If I didn't have the money, I was one of his major customers. And one day in that bookstore, I opened a book, a strange, beat-up, tattered book. And it had some speeches of Abraham Lincoln. Well, I said, this will be interesting. I took it home and sat on the front porch, opened it and started reading, and almost collapsed because that book told me that everything I'd been told in church, everything I'd been told in schools, everything I'd read in the media was a lie. Was a lie. Everything. Can you imagine that? A 10-year-old boy who believed in words and had been taught about the great emancipator, his love for black people. I read that book and I was turned inside out. And on that porch, on that day, I dedicated myself to the pursuit of reading everything I could put my hands on about Abraham Lincoln. I was not reading to get a degree. I was reading to try to save my life. Did I save my life? No. For I discovered that we live in a society that has been systematically telling lies about Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War for at least 143 years. And I'm here in pursuit of this ancient mission of trying to create a dialogue in this country on Abraham Lincoln. I am appalled, brothers and sisters and friends. I don't mean to be harsh. Let me quiet down. I'm appalled by the level of ignorance in universities and newspapers and museums on Abraham Lincoln. I've said, and then I will speak, I've said that because of our ignorance of Abraham Lincoln, there has never been a whole or true or relevant museum exhibition on Abraham Lincoln in the United States of America. I'm indebted to Dr. Clark and this center for making it possible for me to say a few words in quieter tones, I hope, about Abraham Lincoln, a man who tells the truth about Abraham Lincoln in the United States of America needs all the help he can get. I appreciate your help, and I want to ask for a moment of personal privilege. I see in this audience two of my favorite people. I'm indebted to Cornell for making it possible for them to do their thing, and I'm indebted to James Turner and Robert Harris for making Cornell let them do their thing. I get teary here, and I shouldn't. James and Bob and I were children together in the first days of the Great Revolution. It was heaven to be living there and marching there and expanding the vocabulary of the American people. And I'm delighted to see them and both of them here. It brings back a time when I was young and when, believe it or not, I had hair. I want to thank Dr. Clark for arranging this dialogue. He and his staff might not agree with everything I say here, but oh, what a wonderful academic initiative to say in the midst of all this going on that everybody is talking about the Orthodox Lincoln. Why don't we hear something from the other side? Why don't we have a dialogue? Isn't that what a university is about? I'm indebted to Dr. Clark for that. For 41 years, ever since publication of my first essay on Lincoln, I have been called then for a national dialogue on Abraham Lincoln. For 41 years, I've been saying that we're dying of lies at the highest level of American culture, and that we blacks, whites, need truth today, almost as much as we need bread. A long time ago, when I was a student at Morehouse College, the great Benny Mays, one of the greatest teachers of our generation, of this generation, the great Benny Mays, used to tell us that the mission of a university, the mission of a college, is to tell the truth. And he told me, and he told Martin Luther King and others in that time, die poor, unknown, unloved, a failure, a disgrace even, but never shut your eyes to the truth. Tell the truth, he used to say, even though the heavens fall, even though the mall fall. We need that truth today more than ever. And that the record shows that I'm not talking today about civil rights. I'm not talking about affirmative action. I'm talking about the abiding responsibility of a free people, the abiding responsibility of a free university to know itself and to teach the truth to its children and to its elders. It's a crime to knowingly teach young people lies. For 143 years, we've been teaching, preaching, reporting, singing, dancing, and exhibiting half-truths, quarter-truths, and lies with catastrophic consequences to the intellectual, spiritual, and moral fiber of the country and the academy. For something sinister happens to a people. Watch this now. Something sinister happens to a people which asks its best minds to lie in public for the republic. Abraham Lincoln is reported to have said that you can fool all of the people some of the time and some of the people all the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. Don't bet on it. Don't bet on it. They fool all the people, except for one or two or three or 10 or 100. Almost all of them for 143 years, and they're still fooling them. And we've got to decide in this country whether we're going to continue the century-old Lincoln lie or whether we're going to tell the truth. And I approach this event with the understanding that a new reckoning in Lincoln studies calls us all to a revolutionary reappraisal of everything that we think we know about Lincoln and race and the Civil War. When I spoke at Gettysburg, I see some people here, Dr. Clark, don't know that I made a Gettysburg address. When I spoke at Gettysburg, on the battlefield, at the nearby Holiday Inn, at the annual meeting of Lincoln Scholars, I used the title there from my book, Going to Gettysburg, Sorry I Can't Take You. That's a quote from two scholars. I don't think anyone here is old enough to recognize the two scholars, Count Basie and Jimmy Rushing, and the old song, Going to Chicago, Sorry I Can't Take You. I used that song to remind the scholars at Gettysburg that Lincoln didn't take African Americans to Gettysburg, and that every word he said there was a white word said to white people, for white people, about white people. I didn't intend to make Lincoln's mistake, and I brought African Americans with me today so that we would know the totality of the Declaration of Independence and the Civil War. And I brought it with me with the understanding that I'm going to make all day over and over again. Please remember this, that I'm not saying this for black people alone. I'm saying, I've said for 41 years, that you can't understand the Civil War. You can't understand Lincoln. You can't understand the American dilemma unless you understand the joy and the pain and the glory of the Black Odyssey in this land. And let me say here as a preliminary that we're assuming today, I know you know all these things, we're assuming a basic familiarity with the basic facts of history. That black people came to America before George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. The blacks were here before the Mayflower. It's a good title for a book. The blacks were here before there was a New York or Wall Street. They teach that here, don't they? I know you know all these things. And that an educated black man settled in Illinois and founded the city of Chicago a generation before the poor white family of Lincolns crossed the state line. I've heard a lot of people talking recently, you heard them talking recently everywhere on the Allied waves about the hard-working white people who made this country great. You hear them last week? All day long they were talking about the hard-working white people who made this country great. But no one said in prime time, no one said a word in prime time about the black men and women who defined hard work in America, who created the capital that made capitalism in this country possible, and who is still owed Brother Obama for the work they did from sun up to sundown, 6 days a week for 200 years without pay. You see where I'm heading? This is not a game. If you think this is an academic game, you're in the wrong church, in the wrong pew, and you have completely misunderstood the meaning of history, which cannot be understood if you only read it or listening to it. You have to do it. This means, among other things, that Abraham Lincoln tells me who he is by what he did and did not do in history. It means that the Lincoln scholar tells me who he is by the words he writes, and watch this, and the words he doesn't write, for he is paid most of all for the words he doesn't write. It means that the student tells me who she is, not only by the paper she writes, but by the paper she lives. That's where you get an A or B. It means that to understand Lincoln and Wills and Bennett at Gettysburg, you must go back personally to 1863 and go to Gettysburg yourself. It's on that deep and dangerous level. So I invite you today, in the spirit of the occasion, to a meditation on one word. The little three-letter word, all. The little three-letter word that wiped out George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln and Woodrow Wilson and Ronald Reagan and Scalia and Clarence Thomas, not to take the matter further. All. What does it mean? Does all mean all? Does all mean all? No exceptions, no Scalia language. Does all mean all? I invite you this week, and while we're having all this debate about Lincoln at Gettysburg, I invite you to meditate on the word all. 232 years we've been at this. And we still haven't asked the question, I answered it. And let me say here in passing that the white founding fathers were not the only founding fathers. My founding fathers and mothers include Crispus Attucks. Everybody here knows Crispus Attucks. The first to defy, the first to die in the American Revolution. My founding fathers include Crispus Attucks and the black brothers who went out into the streets of Boston and drove the British soldiers out when John Adams was playing games. My founding fathers and mothers include Harriet Tubman and Abigail Adams. Everybody here know Abigail Adams? They do all the books on John Adams. But anybody here know Abigail Adams? In the middle of the conflict, she told her husband John Adams and she told Thomas Jefferson it was a disgrace for them to play games with big words while they were holding slaves and ignoring the words of the Declaration. My founding fathers and brothers who fought on Bunker Hill. You know there were brothers on Bunker Hill? And that 5,000 blacks fought in the American Revolutionary War. My brothers and sisters were the black and white slaves. George Washington and other founding fathers and mothers owned not only black slaves, they owned white men and women. My brothers and sisters include Benjamin Banneker, who wrote a letter to Thomas Jefferson in 1891, get that date, and told him he was blowing it. You didn't have to wait till Lerone Bennett came here to say that Thomas Jefferson blew it. Benjamin Banneker wrote a letter to Thomas Jefferson in 1891 and told him that he was blowing it. Let me see if I can find the passage. He said to him, "Look back. I entreat you. Look back to the day when you started the Great Revolution and believed in it, and now look at yourself when you destroyed the revolution by holding black people in slavery and one of the greatest crimes of the century. Look back. I invite you this week to the Gettysburg season, and I invite you to rewrite in your minds what Abraham Lincoln called the white man's Declaration of Independence. I'm rewriting in my mind. I hope you'll take some paper and rewrite in your mind, what do you think today the Declaration of Independence ought to say? All men are created equal. It will not pass. You will not get a passing grade anywhere in America with the first sentence of all men are created equal. Well, let's try again. Why don't we say all men and women are created equal? You're going in the right direction, but my declaration is another thing, and you write your own declaration. The declaration I want to live says, all people, without regard to race, creed, color, gender, or national origin. What's the difference between what I said and what Thomas Jefferson said? It's very abstract. I want some concrete words here. That's the declaration I'm writing in my mind. I ask you this week, if you're serious, think about in your mind, what would your declaration say? My declaration would say, all people without regard to race, creed, color, gender, or national origin, or income. Fool you, didn't I? Our income. Are entitled to concrete rights here and now, including life, freedom. I want to avoid the word liberty, which has a bad reputation in the West and in the Scalia vocabulary. They're entitled to life, freedom, the best available education, the best available health care without regard to income, and the right to pursue truth and meaning. I was listening the other day to a national convention where people got stuck on the rights of the middle class. I know what they meant, but if you say the wrong thing and think the wrong thing, you're bound to do the wrong thing. especially in poor white communities and black communities where the immediate need is the transformation of the whole economic and social structure and the creation for the first time in the United States of America of a level playing field. And I hope you will let me say a word or two here about the political situation. And I have to ask you to be wary of the game they're playing on us and the game they're trying to play on us. For I must say it, somebody must say it, somebody has to say it, that the nomination of one man is not the end of the game. And that 10 elections, 100 elections, will not destroy the accumulated disadvantages of black people and poor people in this country. And I've heard a number of people saying to people across the board, you know, the struggle is over, the racial struggle is over. And it's extraordinary to hear these people who've never been in the struggle. They've never been in the struggle. You hear them everywhere saying that the struggle is over. Come off base. Leave your base. Do you think that can peculiar you on third base after all these years? And he's a provocateur who's never been in the struggle, telling you, come off third base, man. The struggle is over. The struggle will not be over until we raise the accumulated disadvantages of the past, and until all men and women mean all men and women and children. And I hope you will not be lured off base by the provocateurs. And if you rise, you will get your marching shoes of the 60 resoled and keep your marching shoes dry. Because I can tell you, you're going to need them again. It is against that background that I come to the matter at hand with the understanding that it is impossible to understand Lincoln or Gettysburg if we don't abandon the American analytic, which makes a fetish out of the speech by assuming that the words in the speech speak for themselves. But that academic fallacy, widely spread in the academic community, ignores the fact that the words in the speech cannot be understood if you don't interpret them in the context of the dreams, goals, strategies of the man making the speech. Who was the cleanup speaker at Gettysburg? He was a 54-year-old white man who opposed equal rights for blacks and Mexicans and who wanted to win the war, bring the Southern brethren home, and deport all black people. Even as he spoke, he was scheming to deny liberty and equal rights to all black people. Who was the cleanup speaker and who was not the cleanup speaker? He was not, first of all, the great emancipator, nor the small emancipator, nor the economy-sized emancipator. And the first step on the way to truth is to tell students and patrons of libraries and museums and presidents of the United States what everybody recognizes and nobody denies, that to the extent that black people were ever freed, they were freed by the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. I know of no sane and rational historian with a valid library card who denies that. And if you meet a historian in Ithaca who says that the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves, call 911. For you're either dealing with a charlatan or an innocent who needs protection from himself. The second step, I must hurry, is to stop telling students, patrons of museums and libraries that Lincoln was opposed to slavery. He was not opposed to slavery. He was opposed to the extension of slavery. And he supported slavery. He supported the domestic slave trade. And he supported the worst law ever passed by the American Congress, the Fugitive Slave Law. He told his neighbors in Illinois to go out into the streets and help the marshals capture black men, women, and children and send them back to slavery. Not only that, in the worst act of his life, which you would not find discussed in any of the great books on Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, the lawyer, went into a court in Charleston, Illinois, in October 1847 and asked two judges to send a black mother and her 4 black children back to slavery. I've been waiting for 50 years. I've been saying for 50 years that I'm waiting for one of the big white Lincoln scholars to say in their books that what Lincoln did in Charleston, Illinois in 1847 was indefensible. Was indefensible. I've also said, and I apologize for saying it here, but I say it everywhere. I said that if a German lawyer had entered a German court and asked a German judge to send a Jewish mother and her 4 children back to the concentration camp, everybody in America would be up in arms. Why don't we have the same respect for black mothers and their children and the men who operate against them? This brings me to the second point I want to make here, third point, and that is the fact that Lincoln wanted to deport black people and create an all-white state. He didn't hide it. He didn't whisper it. He said out loud everywhere that he wanted to deport all blacks, intelligent blacks and illiterate blacks, light-skinned blacks and dark-skinned blacks, members of the Urban League and members of the Nation of Islam. He wanted all black people out. He wanted Obama out and Oprah and Lerone, Bennett and Dr. Clark. He wanted all black people out. And he wanted the last black out of the state of New York to turn out the lights and shut the door. All his life he supported that thing, and if he had his way, there would be no Obama in America today, and there would be no Oprah in America today. And so we are challenged to understand that, and to understand that the greatest fact about Lincoln at Gettysburg is that he did not say anything. It's a pretty speech, but he didn't say anything. He didn't say anything about the major issues of that time. He didn't say anything about the Confederates. He didn't say anything about the slaves. He didn't say anything about the New York draft riot, which happened in that year. He didn't say anything. And in approaching that, because we must understand what he was doing. And if he didn't say any of that, then what in the world did Abraham Lincoln and his apologists think he was doing and saying at Gettysburg? The answer is shocking. He was just rapping. He was just rapping. And in order to understand that speech and what we must do to respond to it, we must understand what was not said there and what we must say here and now. He didn't say the word slave. He didn't say any of those words at Gettysburg. And I want to say in conclusion, give me a few minutes, that somebody said that Lincoln went up to Gettysburg and reinvented America in 272 words. But history is not made by men saying words. History is made by men working, fighting, and struggling. What changed American history was not the speech made at Gettysburg, but the series of events that sent Lincoln to Gettysburg, a series of events that Abraham Lincoln fought every step of the way. To tell the truth, and I'm reading from page 574 and 575 of Forced into Glory. To tell the truth, America was reinvented not by Lincoln, but against Lincoln. It was reinvented not by his acts, but by the acts he opposed. It was reinvented not by the words he said at Gettysburg, but by the event words of the Civil War, by the event words of Nat Turner and John Brown and the abolitionists, by the Emancipation Act of the 37th Congress, by the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, by the sacrifices of Union veterans, including the 200,000 blacks without whom the prize could not have been won, by the Black Freedom Movement, which continued the process of emancipation in the 20th century that Lincoln tried to stop in the 19th century. In the process of reinventing America, a process that is going on right now, the men and women who opposed Lincoln and Lincoln's ideas, W.B. Du Bois, Thurgood Marshall, Martin Luther King Jr., and others were more important than Abraham Lincoln. This, finally, is what Du Bois helped us to understand in The Gift of Black Folk, when he said that one cannot think of democracy in America or in the modern world without reference to the American Negro. The democracy established in America in the 18th century was not designed to be a democracy of the masses of men, and it was thus singularly easy for people to fail to see the incongruity of democracy and slavery. It was the Negro himself who said, who forced the consideration of this incongruity, who made emancipation inevitable, and made the modern world at least consider it and act on it. This democracy was not conceived as Lincoln erroneously believed, 80 even 80 years ago. On the contrary, it has not yet been conceived, which is another way of saying that it's a multiple, many-colored, many-fathered, many-mothered birth that evolved and is still evolving. And this is what Langston Hughes meant in one of the great Gettysburg speeches of our times, when he said in a great poem that there's a dream in the land with its back against the wall. By many names and strange it is sometimes called. There are those who claim this dream for theirs alone, a sin we know, for which they must atone. This dream today in battle with its back against the wall. To save the dream for one, it must be saved for all. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm informed that we have about 5 to 7 minutes for any questions. I'm sure all questions have been answered, but we'll take the one or two that were not answered. Yes.
My question is whether you have it completely right about the relative importance of words and deeds. You stand at the top of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, and you look at that plaque that commemorates the presence of Martin Luther King and the March on Washington. Is it possible that the deeds that made it possible to give substance to the American ideal also depended on the words that Lincoln enunciated? Whether he knew what the words really meant or not is another story. And could we possibly take the words seriously and understand that Lincoln might have failed for not understanding the deeds that the words should have committed him to? I guess when I listen to you, I can't understand Martin Luther King unless the words and the deeds need to go together.
And I appreciate your comments, and I'd like to hear the first part of what you said. I didn't hear it. I said, and I mean, that in history, words alone do not change history. Words fed by the blood of the Spirit. Doing it! You can make a pretty speech. Or you can say, as Lincoln said, that I'm opposed to slavery. I've always been opposed to slavery, but he didn't do anything about it. Words plus deeds. King is important. Brother James, Brother Robert, important. The great souls of the 60s are important because they went out in the streets and did it and didn't sit around talking about it all day and all night long. Because of what they did. We live in a different century. You want to know what will change the bar, raise the level of bar? A series of Montgomerys would raise the bar. Action. Action. That's the only thing I meant. That in history, deeds count. And I would say also, and I hope at a later time maybe we can talk about it, that the deadly sin of the Abraham Lincolns is they always talking about their principles and that they're never connected to any deeds. One of the great failures of Abraham Lincoln at Gettysburg is that he took to the highest level at Gettysburg what I call the American sin, the separation of the word and the act, of the affirmation and the deed. I thank you for your question. I love words. I love words. I love words. I've lived by them, but I learned in the 60s. Oh, my goodness. I don't know. And I'm so furious to find so many young people talking foolishness about the Civil Rights Revolution. That was a revolution. Selma changed Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson didn't change Selma. The African-American people. Oh, if I had the time. I was in Montgomery. You know, not the PhDs, people who read books, maids, porters, walking the length and breadth of that city because they had a new idea of themselves. There's this great story of the leaders of the Montgomery boycott. You know, when they called the one-day boycott, nothing like this had ever been tried before. And they didn't think it was going to work, you know, anything. And so there's this great story of King and all the leaders getting up on the first day of the boycott and running to the window to see how many black people were on the bus. And you know what? There were no black people on the bus. The black people in Montgomery, average people, created Montgomery and created King. And we shall never overcome unless we understand the great truths of the great revolution of the 60s. Yes.